Maintenant, nous allons suivre la dernière conférence de cette série. Elle va être donnée par nos deux collègues qui nous viennent de Nairobi, le professeur GITUI et la professeure Beatrice CHURU. Elle va porter sur la question de l'éducation, la question de comment dépasser en quelque sorte l'écart entre les garçons et les filles en Afrique. Quel rôle peut jouer l'Église? You have the floor.
Yes, good afternoon. Are you still awake? Yes. Wake your neighbor if they are praying for us, please. We welcome you to our presentation, Beatrice and myself. We want to thank you, Jean Paul, for the invitation to this gathering. We are going to talk about overcoming the cultural gap between boys and girls in Africa, the role of the church. Beatrice and myself went to the same school, but she came there after I had left. We were brought up by the sisters, the Loreto sisters, who taught us many things about girls and boys. Now we are parents of both girls and boys, and we also teach. And on our day-to-day basis, we interact with young men and young women. We are also active in our respective churches. I belong to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I was formed in Catholic schools and I teach at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. And so our lives are around boys and girls, and we appreciate the fact that we have a chance to talk about this issue, which is pertinent to us. Recently, we have done a book, an edited book, and both of us have written something about boys and girls. I wrote about the initiation rites in Africa, and Beatrice wrote about education, and all these are touching on our young people. Our presentation is going to be about the pluralistic context of cultural gaps in Africa. And much as I don't get French, I want to thank the previous speaker for talking about these pluralities in the African context. Then we are going to talk about the cultural gaps from a historical perspective. We'll talk about what it was before Christianity, before education, and these aspects still continue. We are also going to talk about examples of the impact of these gaps on boys and girls, and then we are going to make recognition and proposals on some of the roles of the church in overcoming these gaps. Culture has got many facets, such as the social, the ethical, the economic, and the political. And so when we are going to talk about these cultural gaps, we are actually talking about all aspects of life. And when we are talking about the cultural gap, we are not isolating the gap between girls and boys alone, because it exists in the context of many other gaps. Without understanding this, we risk misdiagnosing the situation. In other words, when we are going to talk about boys and girls, we are actually talking about the entire society. We are talking about the entire population. Let me talk about some of the pluralities that our young people face, and And we could say then that our young people and ourselves in Africa, we are at some crossroads. Sometimes we could say that we have an identity crisis. Many times I put it to my students, who are you? Are you an African? Then we say many things and we realize that we are actually not fully African. Then who are we? And sometimes we ask, are we Christian? And we find that yes and no. When we talk about even the churches that we belong to, we are neither here nor there. So some of the pluralities are about age. As I said earlier, we are mothers. And for me, I am a grandmother. I have my mother, who is my stepmother, because my real mother is not there. Then there is myself, and there is my daughter, and now I have several granddaughters. Who is right? Is it my mother? Is it myself? Is it my daughter? Or is it my grandchildren who put me into very tough questions? So we talk about pluralities of age. We are talking about gender, boys and girls. We are talking about the past and the present. We are talking about family, church, and state. Bishop Wachuku, I raised my hand, but the time was out. He gave us very interesting observations, but I was going to ask him what could be his comment about church, ethnicity, and politics in Africa. Those are the pluralities that we face. Religion and the secular influences. As I said earlier, which religion do we subscribe to? Bishop Andrew talked about the evangelicals. I talk again to my students and I ask, sister, I think it's you I saw at the crusade in Uhuru Park in Nairobi. Sister, what were you doing there? Sister might tell me that she was there doing some research, but I think it's the deep search that we have. We are looking for meaning in our lives. Then there are many voices. The voices of our family, the voices of our peers, the voices from our schools, the voices from social media. I don't know about the context where you come from, but social media is the king. I don't know whether to say the queen as well, but social media is dominating and challenging ourselves. And globalization in general. Earlier, I asked a question about the people who are coming from Africa to Europe to the US. And thank you again, the earlier presenter, for talking about Colombia and the immigration issue there. There's the allure to go elsewhere or to do things which other people are doing. So those are the pluralities, the crossroads, the identity crisis that we have in our context. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all. As Mary has said, we wanted to put the context of the culture gap between boys and girls in the context of so many other gaps, because it cannot be treated in isolation. And we want to look at culture in two moments, as she said, in a historical kind of way. First of all, the tradition of African indigenous culture and the gaps that are inherent there. And then the contemporary world. It is not exactly in a linear arrangement. Obviously, traditional culture pre-existed the contemporary globalized world for us, but the fact is they interact quite a bit to date. And that is why it is relevant to talk about the indigenous culture. Also because in our research of about now 20-30 years with an Institute of African Studies in which we have been both very involved, we have found that actually the meaning system that is most active among all Africans is the African worldview. When we have big questions about life, it is the African worldview that we resort to, and then we proceed from there. And I guess that is also the logic of the work we are doing with enculturation, because we realize unless we actually get it anchored in the depths of people's identity, it's not happening. So this is the rationale. Now going then to the African indigenous cultures, certainly in the part of the continent from which we come, but perhaps across the continent, child rearing is equivalent to education, the child rearing practices we had. And it was a composite of many ways in which the society nurtured and educated boys and girls, sometimes together and sometimes apart. And it was a well-defined, well-thought-out system. It was not random, it was not hit and miss, it was very organized. And what was it organized about? It was informed by a very clear vision of the future expectations for those boys and girls when they are adults. So it was seen as preparation for a life that was clearly going to look like this, like this, like this, like this, and therefore we did things accordingly. So nurturing was a function of that vision for the good of the society, and that was presumed to be automatically the good of the individual and often was. Now, that time, early education in the home for the early years, the first 7 to 10 years, was especially around, I think in Eastern Africa, it's a colder place than West Africa. We had a lot of sitting around fires. We would sit around fires with grandmothers and mothers for 7 to 8 years, first years of your life up to about 10. This is where you receive a very rich diet of symbolism, using stories and myths and legends and folktales and proverbs and riddles and jokes, which built up your worldview. In some cases, of course, or to a lesser extent, fathers and grandfathers are involved because they are in the compound, perhaps under the tree, etc. But the lead persons in that preliminary education are mothers and grandmothers. And we know now from the psychology of education how important those first years are. And the wisdom of our people was to anchor that education around the family, around symbolisms that would last and somehow build your worldview for the rest of your life. And together, it was both the girls and the boys. They were not separated at this stage. And so we were exposing them also to the skills of relationship across gender, within your own people, because you would have your fathers, as I said, not too far away, your grandfathers, your many fathers. We didn't usually have one father, one mother. We had many mothers, many fathers, older sisters, older brothers, but you learned to relate with them in the context of the home, and the home was the school. So we cannot say we didn't have an education system. We had a very rigorous and very well organized and focused education system, and that provided a great worldview for that first part and a reservoir of wisdom for interpreting the world. So also at that stage, all the children learned basic life skills. In my country at the moment, we keep talking about life skills, or the last 20 years, life skills. People are being taught how to communicate, people are being taught. These things will be taught in the home, in a very safe environment, where you became aware that it's not just about getting your best, but also taking care of the welfare of the rest. So your best together with the rest. And I want to say that it provided, therefore, children, even boys, with the ability, for example, when they went away to the forest at an older age or to the bush, they would not stay hungry. They would know how to cook, how to take care of themselves, because they had learned all these things as well, and vice versa. So you learned more than just limited gender-related skills, at least at the very beginning, and that then would be refined in the higher levels. I think it also underscores and is perhaps educative, informative, the tremendous trust and respect for the role of women that was there. Because as I said, they are the lead person. You know, in my culture, in our cultures in Eastern Africa, and perhaps in many other parts of Africa, when you say today, and this I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself, is when we say the kitchen, and we say, for example, today, your woman's place is in the kitchen. I think from a Western perspective, that has almost always looked like the lesser place. But if you hear what we just described about that education setting around the fire, the kitchen was actually the main room. It was the sitting room. And the woman was the leader of the main family home. And she influenced very much how the thinking of the children would be. So there is that prism as well. Needless, we are not, we don't want to just sugarcoat everything and look like everything was perfect, because not all our societies were patriarchal, but increasingly they were becoming patriarchal, just like the rest of the world, because again Africa is not in isolation. And patriarchy has grown over the last millennium or even two, and as patriarchy was increasing, and in the more patriarchal societies, girls were seen to be of lesser value than boys. So I think I have heard many stories of somebody needing to take another wife because they didn't get a boy child. Very rarely you heard that they have to marry another wife and another one because they didn't get a girl child. So seemingly you could be okay without a boy child, without a girl child, but you needed to have a boy child. In some places, celebrations around girls are toned down or seem to, like in my culture, when a boy is born, we have 5 annullations. We can go to the explanation of the meanings, we don't have the time. But when a girl is born, we only needed 4. Granted, there are philosophical explanations for that, but still it will look like you are a lesser person. And there's another community where they said, even the way they refer to a girl and a woman, it is as the person who doesn't belong anywhere. Because when you are growing in your mother's house, you will not be living there. In your future life, that's not your place. So you will be going somewhere else. Everybody sees you as someone of another place. Then when you get married and you move to the other home, some people say, this is the one from another place. Right? So there is no time when you are really fully at home. So I think though, and I want to underscore that when we use the Western prism to look at African culture, and I think in the Western world, patriarchy perhaps was more advanced, then we seem to see much more of that, of those images. This is not what the argument is about. It's when we find ourselves kind of in conflict or in competition, what happens? So despite being societies that were clearly gender delineated and whose ideals lay in the maintenance of these roles, we have a lot to learn from them because our societies are different. We are not saying despite us that is lesser, because that delineation and differentiation is not a liability. It may have some elements of liability, but it had a lot of advantages as well, and especially for its time. But what can we learn from this? Of course, the importance of the shared vision of where we are going, very, very critical in bringing up children. The high dignity of each gender and its roles. It was not competition, it was a very high dignity for each. The primacy of women in early education of both genders, and then some gender differentiated education towards later in life as you would imagine, okay? But especially those first 3 ideas. Now then we move on from the African indigenous culture and you have the encounter with the West. The imposition, you would have to say, of Western-style education. It was an imposition, and much as it has a lot of advantages, our people knew, especially because of the way it was put, the disruption that it brought. We knew, especially the first people who encountered this, we knew it's a disruption, we knew what we were losing. And it is important, I think, that we stay honest, and while we appreciate so many benefits of Western education in Africa today, it's also important that we face up to the losses that we have incurred, and some of which we continue to accrue, because colonialism is by no means finished. Now, the gap brought on by the churches and schools education system, they were the agents that took children away from the home and from parents. And in some cases, a little bit like happened in the First Nations of North America and some other parts of the world, children were actually completely disconnected from the parents and from the families in order to be socialized into what was going to be civilized. And this introduced a culture gap, an attitude not just of a breakage, not just of the knowledge being passed on, but also an attitude of superiority or conflict between generations, where the younger children, the younger people as they grew, were more attuned, at least in terms of the social and economic systems, to the colonial economy, that they were attuned to their families, their loyalties were divided. And it is good also to be mindful that the education system of the colonial economy was for the colonial economy, in favor of colonialism and for the preservation of colonialism, and to date quite a bit of it of neo-colonialism. And so that creates the challenges. That examination system, that education system also brought with it an examination system, where you have people, some people pass and continue, some people don't pass and they remain behind. This is new for us. Everyone used to pass, everybody moved on, because education was about life in different levels. So examinations in various disciplines, they bring in an element of competition, and sometimes it looks like for you to go to the next stage, there is not enough space for everybody in the next stage. So some will go and some will not go. And normally the colonial system and neo-colonial system rewards more those that go through, and would punish, at least until recently, those that don't. So already you have introduced, bad blood, if you like, a sense that education is something that we are going to have to fight about. It is very competitive, but it also requires a lot of conformity, a lot of rules, and not necessarily respecting much of the logic of the life that you may be used to in your home. It suppresses creativity, because children have to get it right in order to pass. The sentence about don't think about it, just do it, has been quoted very often, which you can see the kind of damage it can do to us. Now, so this gap also, children are raised under the burden of perfection, because children are, when they go to the school system, mind you, they are now removed. Initially, it was in order to be civilized. Today, now the colonial economy takes over. Parents have to go to work in a different world from the world of the children, where traditional society, they stayed with the children and the children learned by imitation. Now, when you come to the new world, the separation continues, and very frequently the children complain to us that their parents keep telling them how they were good, how when they were the same age, they were doing very well. What is wrong with you? So the burden of perfection, rather than compassionate companionship, is one of the experiences that our children have. Finally, I want to underscore also the gap that is brought by an education that does not necessarily bring you what it promised. Too many children, we've been saying this, have watched their brothers and sisters go through school, work so hard, get degrees, and they don't get the promised jobs, the promised prosperity. So there is a way in which it is a little bit confusing, and the children live with this existential confusion, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. So the vision is not clear. The community accompaniment has been fragmented. What you have is a lot of competition. The schools frequently have not had the chance to create community, or have increasingly lost the opportunity to create communities. Like when we were in school, community in school was much better than it is now for children, because the demand and the competition has been so high. So even with Christian education and wonderful teaching, which is there, we have not succeeded sometimes in building communities that are experienced to be supportive. This is a major cultural gap. And so, now my time is running out, so I have to hurry through this. Okay, so this mechanistic education, I think a little bit like a conveyor belt, you move until you come here, and then you come to the end, and frequently it does not deliver. We want to say though that the other thing that has been missing is the education in view of family, in view of marriages and family. We put it on a light note. Sometimes parents are telling children, don't think about girls. You're talking to your son. Don't think about girls now. Concentrate on your studies. This is a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, up to 18-year-old. Don't think about it. In fact, we have had separate education, separate schools for boys, schools for girls. And then the man is 25, 26, 20, and you're wondering, he doesn't bring me a wife, what is happening? We never foresaw, we never prepared them for the beauty of marriage. In addition to not preparing them for the beauty of marriage, the marriages in which we ourselves are, or the families in which we are, have suffered so much. There is a lot of violence, there is a lot of brokenness in the homes, and we may have a culture of superficial looking fine. My family is doing fine, we do all the right movements, but we know the children sense the tensions that we struggle with. So this is also important, because it is affecting them in terms and creating the tension that in their mind they really do not want, they are not preparing for creating families. In fact, they are afraid of families. They have, many girls say they don't want to get married. They have seen what their mothers have gone through. I am suffering here. Seriously. Okay, we also, in Kenya we have had, in the last few years, a crisis of femicide. A lot of women being killed in intimate relationships by boyfriends, by husbands, and you wonder again, where is this violence coming from? But I think you can tell from what we have said. We want to mention the lack of traditional education. In ideally Christian education, we want an education that affects the mind, the hands, the ability, skills to do stuff, but also an education of the heart. Western education, Western styled education in our schools has that gap of the education of the heart. We do not process our joys, we do not process our relationships, we don't have time to process because there is so much pressure. And so humanization is being short-circuited. And it is not that surprising that we don't know how to deal with challenges or relationship issues when we grow up. And we have relationships between boys and girls in the home, and they turn violent. Now, I do want to say this, that 75% of the population of Africa is the youth, is those boys and girls. And so the question would be, and I think you can see the gap yourselves, the gap that what percentage of our resources, be they material or human, are actually dedicated to the development and advancement of our youth. National budgets, for example, I think it will be open for you to calculate And we could ask the same for ourselves, even in our churches. The resources, because it's the same population, at least the same ratio. If 70% of our people in the church are youth, how much of the resources of the church, human, etc., material, are going into really coming to grips with the challenges the youth are facing? Of course, there are those other known gaps that girls actually have it rougher than frequently when there is an education challenge. We don't have enough money to send people to school. The girl is the one who will not go. The boys will go. When we have employment, they are less likely to get employment. Frequently, they are also being attacked, if you like, by cultural practices that feel they need to keep them out of school, especially if female genital mutilation and other marriages in some rural areas. But some people feel desperate that we've lost our culture so much. And when we feel so desperate about those losses, we say, the fact that our boys are also struggling, because boys are also struggling. In fact, in Kenya, we talk about the boy child. Now it's become a big topic. Our boys suffer from drugs much more than drug abuse, more than girls. Many of them are likely to be taken into gangs, especially from the low-income areas. Because of violence in the homes, absence of parents, absence of fathers creates a vacuum for boys, identity crisis, high suicide levels, much higher, or rather, I don't know, the successful suicide levels, if you like, are higher among boys. I think the attempts are higher among girls, but the successful suicide rates, they are higher among boys than they are among girls. And so, we want to say that it is not okay to simplify the experience that we are having, and we want to say the role of the church has already been, I am now skipping over a bit of stuff here. Yes, we had the Gen Z revolution, you might have heard about it, most of you, especially in Africa. We had the Gen Z-led uprising in Kenya last year, and in that uprising, the Gen Z said, they are disappointed by us, the older generation. Not only we are providing very bad leadership, poor governance, runaway corruption, etc., but also that we are tribalistic and all the things we talked about. They describe themselves as tribeless, classless, fearless, leaderless. They went around with a phone and a bottle of water. And so we ask ourselves, so what is their identity? I think we have also identity crisis going on. And when people are fragile like that, they become very explosive. We shouldn't be surprised that the relationships are suffering. And as far as we are concerned, the role of the church is to dialogically, along with others, recreate hope, revamp hope. Hope is the biggest thing that we really need for our young people. And that can be done by reconceptualizing the vision of where we want to go. The lack of vision does not help. If together with others we can agree, what are the ideals we would like to work for? Can we create images of them even with our radio stations, our television systems, etc.? Can we have professional youth ministry going on in our church? Youth ministry has been taken too lightly for too long. And yet, with all the Catholic universities we have on the continent, if we can professionalize youth ministry and produce people who are actually doing research as well as ministering to youth at a level that is able to reach them at the heart, that would certainly be very good, and education of the heart. Continue the wonderful things the church already does, and my time running out, I will not mention them, but I do want to say though that we need also to teach mentorship with vulnerability. Clergy, teachers, parents, we tend to pose like we have it all worked out. And the youth can see we don't actually. People know we are not. We don't have it all. Can we walk with our young people and demonstrate to them that difficulties and the cross are to be lived through and to be worked through and to grow with character, compassion and care. And this will give hope and encouragement to our young people. So in summary, what we are really looking for is to re-engineer hope, which means a vision, a pathway, encouraging agency of the young people, and then professionalizing youth ministry, because it's one of the ways we need to witness to a cultural revolution, I think, in favor especially of families, so that youth can have a better time. And lastly, an education of the heart, which includes vulnerability and working through character to care and to hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation.